Hello everyone and welcome to this video sans frontiere video. This is Jay Wakefield here, and here's another video. I think it's the last of the videos to be pulled up from the old Blue Planet 64 channel. This is actually a video on Asperger Syndrome. It was very popular while it was on the Blue Planet 64 channel, and it's basically me explaining a wee bit about Asperger Syndrome. Lasts about half an hour, so make sure you have plenty of time to kind of watch this video, and I hope you enjoy it. And because it's a Blue Planet 64 video, you can watch it magically get dark and become nighttime, and my hair grow to kind of half the length that it currently is. I'm doing this video because a few of my friends on our vintage computer Facebook group are wanting to kind of know about Asperger Syndrome and what it is. I'm the sort of person who likes to talk about disability and kind of feels like, you know, it should be out in the open. Less people will become, you know, they'll start making up their own assumptions, and some of these could be negative, and negative assumptions about disability is never a good thing. So I'm not saying that anyone here is watching this is going to do that, by the way. But just saying that I am open about disability, so don't worry, no one has offended me. I just wanted to do this video off my own back. Now, just in case anyone is wondering, I do have Asperger Syndrome. Maybe you've noticed. But actually, yes, I do have AS. Now, next question you probably have is, well, what is Asperger Syndrome? And, well, I'm currently typing this into my computer so that I can bring up a wee definition from the National Autistic Society Scotland. Basically, I'll read this page to you. It says, as soon as we meet a person, we make judgments about them from their facial expression, tone of voice, body language. We can usually tell whether they are happy, angry, or sad and respond accordingly. Now, people with Asperger Syndrome can find it harder to read the signals that most of us take for granted. This means that they find it more difficult to communicate and interact with others, which can lead to high levels of anxiety and confusion. So about Asperger Syndrome. Asperger Syndrome is a form of autism, which is a lifelong disability that affects how a person makes sense of the world, processes information, or relates to other people. Autism is often described as a spectrum disorder because the condition affects people in many different ways and to varying degrees. Asperger Syndrome is mostly a hidden disability. This means that you can't tell someone has the condition from their outward appearance. People with the condition have difficulties in three main areas. Now, these can be social communication, social interaction, and social imagination. And these three here are often referred to as the triad of impairments and are explained more in detail later on. Now, don't worry, this is nothing to do with any kind of ninja gangsters or anything like that. It's just three sets of difficulties. Now, while there are similarities with autism, people with Asperger Syndrome have fewer problems with speaking and are often of average or above average intelligence. So, I don't know what went wrong for me. They do not usually have the accompanying learning disabilities associated with autism, but may have specific learning difficulties. These may include dyslexia, dyspraxia, or other conditions such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or as my friends across the pond call it, ADD, attention deficit disorder, and epilepsy. With the right support and encouragement, people with Asperger syndrome can lead full and independent lives. So, three main areas of difficulty. The characteristics of Asperger syndrome can vary from one person to another, but are generally divided up into three main groups. So, difficulty with social communication. So someone's put here, if you have Asperger syndrome, understanding conversation is like trying to understand a foreign language. I would say so in the most extreme cases, that sometimes can happen. Well, not necessarily even in the most extreme cases. It can just happen, full stop. I mean, most of the time, personally for me, when I'm interacting in a conversation, if it's a straightforward conversation, maybe something about computers or something, I'm able to interact. Sometimes it might be difficult for me to shut up and let someone else speak. Sometimes I might not know the right time to be able to chip in. That can be really difficult. People with Asperger syndrome sometimes find it difficult to express themselves emotionally and socially. For example, they may have difficulty understanding gestures, facial expressions, or tone of voice. Now, sometimes I can understand tone of voice. Facial expressions I do have problems with, and gestures, it's not always known. I mean, it's like people can read from someone's body language, what they're thinking. And this is probably why I will never close off the best business deal in the world, because I don't know what my potential client, will be thinking. It's like people kind of know this and they're able to kind of pull out the big guns at the right time or something. People with Asperger's may also have difficulty knowing when to start and end a conversation and choosing topics to talk about. And they may use complex words and phrases but may not fully understand what they mean. And they may be very literal in what they say and can have difficulty understanding jokes, metaphor, and sarcasm. For example, a person with Asperger syndrome may be confused by the phrase, "That's cool," when people use it to say something is good. Now, one wee anecdote that I do have actually is, well, this is quite I can't even believe I'm telling it to the whole of the internet now, but when I was 5 years old, I was at school, and it was the last day before Christmas. No, it was the second to last day before Christmas. The Christmas break began at school, and it was like, I was told, "Jay, we're breaking up tomorrow." Of course, I immediately burst into tears and started greeting hysterically, and was like, "Oh, I don't want to break up," because I thought we were literally going to break up. It was quite funny. Well, I guess you had to be there, but yeah. Also, I've known people to be, quite, confused about phrases. Pull your socks up. You tell someone with Asperger's to pull the socks up, they'll immediately reach down for their feet. In order to help a person with Asperger syndrome understand you, you need to keep your sentences short, be clear, and be concise. Difficulty with social interaction. There's a quote here. "I have difficulty picking up social cues and difficulty in knowing what to do when I get things wrong." Many people with Asperger syndrome want to be sociable, but have difficulty with initiating and sustaining social relationships, which can make them very anxious. People with the condition may struggle to make and maintain friendships, not understand the unwritten social rules that most of us pick up without thinking. For example, they may stand too close to another person or start an inappropriate topic of conversation. I know when I was younger, I used to get into people's personal space all the time and didn't realise it. I'm only now kind of starting to realise, geez, that must have been pure uncomfortable for them. Especially if it was a girl I like, Number of girls that I've went and frightened off in the past, People with AS can also find other people unpredictable and confusing. Yes, that's true. they can become withdrawn and seem uninterested in other people, appearing almost aloof. Well, yeah, if I'm in a room with a whole bunch of strange people, I can find it difficult to kind of chat to them. Sometimes, unless it's a conversation that, thread a conversation, if they started talking about something I was really interested in, I probably might chip in. But I mean, it's difficult. I was at the NUS Scotland Zone Conference last week, and I basically stayed around with my group. Because it was just so much easier that way. Because it's like, just random people hanging around. It's difficult to just be able to sit by them and go, "Oh, hey, I'm Jay. I'm the Disabled Students Officer." So I basically just stuck around with the rest of the Scottish exec. Another thing that people with S may do is behave in what may seem an inappropriate manner. I'm not too sure how to lay an example on this one right now. Perhaps standing too close to someone, perhaps being a wee bit too touchy-feely with people. I've known that to happen. If I did it, that was definitely in the past. Difficulty with social imagination is also something else that people with Asperger's have difficulty with. And here we have a quote saying, "We have trouble working out what other people know. We have more difficulty guessing what other people are thinking." It says here, people with Asperger syndrome can be imaginative in the conventional use of the word. For example, many are accomplished writers, artists, and musicians, but people with Asperger syndrome can have difficulty with social imagination. I used to love playing with Lego because I would have all the Lego characters, I'd make stories. I remember playing with Duplo, something else. I had kind of a Duplo kind of train, and I had all these wee characters. The kind of wee Duplo men, and I gave them really odd names. Not going to repeat them on here because you'll all think I'm odd. Well, if you don't already, but I'll probably lose a lot of my subscription base. Yeah, and to be honest, I want you lot to follow my Abstalgia PC stuff because I want people bidding on it when I put it up on eBay. But anywho, yeah. So, where was it? Yeah, I had these Duplo men, and they all used to live in a wee yellow teapot, which was nothing to do with the Duplo, I don't think. That was something completely different. And then I had a Duplo house, which I turned into a schoolhouse, and they used to put that out the way. And they all used to jump on this Duplo train, and they used to go to the wee school and then come back on a morning, come back on an evening, and then maybe they'd sit at the piano and sing stupid songs that 5-year-old me made up. Yeah, I used to be kind of good with all that sort of stuff. However, like I said, people with Asperger syndrome can have difficulty with social imagination. So social imagination is different from kind of conventional, well, I'm going to say kind of the imagination that we all kind of can understand. So, for example, imagining alternative outcomes to situations and finding it hard to predict what will happen next. So, for example, I ordered a second Packard Bell t-shirt, and I got an email saying that it was going to go to my old address, and I was like, oh my goodness. For a while there, I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? It's going to go to my old address, and I'm not going to be able to get it, and I'm going to have wasted all this money. But then I just thought, hang on a minute, I can email these people, or I can use my Skype account, because the people who had sold me the t-shirt are actually based in Chicago, I think. And so basically I was able to use Skype to ring them. It was, it was quite, I think it was about 9 o'clock at night here or something. Well, actually, no, it was about 10 o'clock at night here. And it was only about, I'm not too sure about the time zone difference, but they were in Central Time in the US, and were they in Chicago? I don't know. Please forgive me with my geography and my time zones and what have you. I don't live in the States, obviously. live in Scotland. But see, this is another thing about Asperger's. You want to be literal about things. I mean, really what I wanted to do was be able to say exactly where they were and exactly what time zone they were in, what time it was here and what time it was over there. Even though that's not an obsession of mine, but yeah. Anywho, for some reason, using some sort of coping mechanism, I speaking to my flatmate about it, give myself a couple of minutes to calm down. I was able to actually get on the internet, find a phone number for them, ring it through Skype, which would be cheap, and then I actually spoke to an actual person who was able to change the address label, because it turns out the t-shirt had not actually left the office, it was just scheduled to be picked up. So that was actually fixed, and now the t-shirt is on its way to me at my current address. Okay, understanding or interpreting other people's thoughts, feelings, or actions is something else that people with Asperger syndrome have difficulty with, including myself. And it says here, the subtle messages that are put across by facial expression and body language are often missed. So, I mean, I can't always tell if someone's joking or what have you. It says, having a limited range of imaginative activities, which can be pursued rigidly and repetitively. For example, lining up toys or collecting and organising things related to their interest. So, yeah, I mean, I enjoy computers. And sometimes, that's all I can be doing sometimes. It says, some children with Asperger syndrome may find it difficult to play let's pretend games or prefer subjects rooted in logic and systems such as mathematics. So actually, maybe it's because I am higher functioning. Maybe that is why I have such an imagination. I was able to play some let's pretend games. Sometimes, I played them all. I played, trouble is, I think when I was younger, I would make believe that that was actually real, and I would kind of insist that that's what it was, So, for example, I built, used blocks to build a Santa's grotto at, when I was 5 years old. And I was adamant that there was a Santa's grotto, and that's what it was, and okay, so the characteristics of Asperger syndrome. Characteristics of Asperger syndrome vary from one person to another, but as well as the three main areas of difficulty, people with the condition may have love of routines, I know I do, special interests, I mean that is something that is quite characteristic of someone with Asperger syndrome, and sensory difficulties. Well, I am visually impaired, but not too sure that that's to do with my Asperger's. So love of routines. Someone has actually put here as a quote, if I get anxious, I get in a tiz. I have a timetable. It helps me to see what I have to do next. Otherwise, I will get confused. To try and make the world less confusing, people with Asperger syndrome may have rules and rituals, i.e. ways of doing things, which they insist upon. Young children, for example, may insist on always walking the same way to school. In class, they may get upset if there is a sudden change of timetable. People with Asperger syndrome often prefer to order their day to a set pattern. For example, if they work set hours, an unexpected delay to their journey to or from work can make them anxious or upset. Special interests. Someone's put here as a quote, I remember Samuel reciting the distances of all the planets from the sun to a baffled classmate in the playground when he was 5. Since then, he has had many obsessions, which he loves to talk about at length. So it says here, people with Asperger syndrome may develop an intense, sometimes obsessive interest in a hobby or collecting. Sometimes these interests are lifelong. In other cases, one interest is replaced by an unconnected interest. For example, a person with Asperger syndrome may focus on learning all there is to know about trains or computers. Some are exceptionally knowledgeable in their chosen field of interest. With encouragement, interest and skills can be developed so that people with Asperger syndrome can study or work in their favourite subjects. So, for example, I'm hoping to work as, a computer person. I would like to do that. And as a child, I've always been into computers. Always wanted one of my own, and it was a very excitable time when we got one. The Compact Presario from 1998. But I would talk about nothing but computers, when I was about 13 years old. That was it. And I guess I'm a wee bit the same now, but, I've had quite bad depression over the past year. And getting back into my computers because I was out of the game for a wee bit. Getting back into it is something that's really helped me to kind of recover a wee bit. And I kind of realised this when I was, partly when I was watching the Computer Chronicles in the summer, partly when I was watching, my friend's YouTube channel that, I don't know, the guy who's interested in that mall in Carolina, and we're talking, and then I started collecting my own. I had the ThinkPad 390. I was on that one night, and I was kind of realizing, hang on a minute, this is Windows 98. This is just like my computer, my kind of first computer that I called my own. It was a Intel Celeron based custom build system with a couple of parts out of an old machine that I was given that had a broken mainboard, the original CD drive and what have you, the original hard disk and the original floppy disk, but everything else was new and was running Windows 98. But that was the and that was the thing. I was on my ThinkPad and just, I felt, I realised that, it was taking me back to a time when I felt good, Okay, moving on. Sensory difficulties. It says here, as a quote, Robert has only problems with touch when he doesn't know what's coming, like jostling on cues and people accidentally brushing into him. Light touch seems to be worse for him than a firm touch. So it says here, people with Asperger syndrome may have sensory difficulties. See, I didn't know which context that was in. These can occur in one or all of the senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, or taste. The degree of difficulty varies from one individual to another. Most commonly, an individual's senses are either intensified, oversensitive, or underdeveloped, undersensitive. So, for example, bright lights, loud noises, overpowering smells, particular food textures, and the feeling of certain materials can be a cause of anxiety and pain for people with Asperger syndrome. So, for example, I used to hate doing paper mache at school. I just hated kind of the feel of it, as it was setting, between your fingers. It was, I was always having to wash my hands. I could not stand it. And then one day I kind of realised that I could just throw on a pair of latex gloves into it, and it was absolutely fine, almost kind of nice, kind of the gooey texture without having to mess up my actual hand, It was brilliant. But no, and sometimes, if people kind of touch me unexpectedly, I'm not too keen on that, or it's, hated it. Okay, so it says people with sensory sensitivity may also find it harder to use their body awareness system. The system tells us where our bodies are. So for those with reduced body awareness, it can be harder to navigate rooms avoiding obstructions, stand at an appropriate distance from other people, and carry out fine motor tasks such as tying shoelaces, Some people with Asperger syndrome may rock or spin to help with balance and posture, or to help them deal with stress. Now, I know that my handwriting is terrible, and it's not for want of trying either. You know, I mean, at school I was always, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 16 and a half. So, I guess school just thought I wasn't trying hard enough for the handwriting thing. That and plus I like to use the computers a lot more as well, which couldn't have helped. But no, I mean, I can find handwriting very difficult, especially if I'm having to write small on forms. I just can't do it. There are over 500,000 people in the UK with an autistic spectrum disorder. That's around 1 in 100. People with Asperger syndrome come from all nationalities, cultures, social backgrounds, and religions. However, the condition appears to be more common in males than females. The reason for this is unknown. Causes and cures. What causes Asperger syndrome? The exact cause of Asperger syndrome is still being investigated. However, research suggests that a combination of factors, for example genetic and environmental, may account for changes in brain development. Asperger syndrome is not caused by a person's upbringing, their social circumstances, and is not the fault of the individual with the condition. So just remember that. Is there a cure? There is currently no cure and no specific treatment for Asperger syndrome. Children with Asperger syndrome become adults with Asperger syndrome. However, as our understanding of the condition improves and services continue to develop, people with Asperger syndrome have more opportunity than ever of reaching their full potential. There are many approaches, therapies and interventions which can improve an individual's quality of life. These may include communication-based interventions, behavioural therapy and dietary changes. Information about many of these can be found at www.autism.org/approaches. Next page, diagnosis. Because Asperger syndrome varies widely from person to person, making a diagnosis can be difficult. It is often diagnosed later in children than autism, and sometimes difficulties may not be recognised until adulthood. The typical route for getting a diagnosis is to visit a GP. He or she can refer to an individual to other health professionals who can make a formal diagnosis. Most frequently, they will be psychiatrists or clinical psychologists, and in the case of children, paediatricians. Some people see a formal diagnosis as an unhelpful label. However, for many, a diagnosis helps the individual, families, friends, partners, carers and professionals and colleagues to better understand and manage their needs and behaviour. The key is needed to open the door for specialist support, for example supported living or finding suitable employment. There are diagnostic differences between conditions on the autistic spectrum. Sometimes people may receive a diagnosis of autism or autistic spectrum disorder, high-functioning autism or atypical autism instead of Asperger syndrome. Alternatively, they may be given a diagnosis of pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, so PDDNOS, or semantic pragmatic disorder. However, people who have been given these diagnoses will have similar difficulties and similar support needs to those who have Asperger syndrome. You can find information about the diagnosis and how to get one on the National Autistic Society website. If you'd like to read more about the different types of autism, including Asperger syndrome and diagnosis people have, see a few more links. But personally, there is one thing that I can actually recommend to you. It's actually a book called Asperger Syndrome for Dummies. Now, I'm currently reading this on Kindle, and it's a fantastic book. It kind of takes you through kind of the history of kind of where, the discovery of Asperger syndrome came about, some of the problems with diagnoses and some of the problems you have. I will also say, though, for people with Asperger syndrome, it can be difficult to deal with emotions, you know? And because people with Asperger syndrome are really quite keen to make friends, you know, and I find it difficult to do, a lot of people with Asperger syndrome can become depressed. I think depression can also occur because people will, you know, people with Asperger's do focus on one thing, you know, so if they're focusing on what's making them feel bad, then the depression will, you know, they can start to suffer with depression. And, you know, if that happens in my case, you know, I ended up focusing on the depression itself. It was just a vicious cycle, just went round and around and around. Um, you know, so depression isn't a part of Asperger's. It doesn't have to be, although for a lot of people with Asperger's, it sometimes can be. Well, I really do hope that this has answered a lot of your questions. Um, I appreciate you for watching this video, and if there's anything else you would like answered, please comment at the bottom of the video. I will do my best to actually provide an answer to you. Um, so yeah, this is me signing off now, and I will